Ollie, you and I love a morning news bomb. Jordan's still learning the excitement and the adrenaline where we have a good show prepared and then we take the script and we go whoosh because CF Montreal goes out and sacks Hernan Losada. That is where we are going to begin the show today, because it's pretty significant news, Ollie. Obviously, it was a season where CF Montreal had much higher expectations, looking for more. There was some turmoil with the lack of spending. The supporters weren't pleased, and because of how the end of the season went and how really the disappointment was perforating throughout the club of being that far out of the playoffs, Hernan Losada is now out of a job. Let's start with the timing and the fact that CF Montreal is now looking for a new gaffer. All your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not hugely surprised because I think if you'd listened to some of the comments that were made at the end of season media availability and some of the interviews that were given, it was hardly a glowing endorsement from people like Gabriel Gervais and Olivier Renard as to the job Anan Lasada had done. It was almost like a weirdly negative take, not because there's not basis for that, because some of their criticisms were fair, but for a coach who was at that point still in the job and he was kind of getting, pretty frankly criticized by the people above him. So I'm not shocked that they've decided to make a change on the back of that. Um, I think with Anan Lazada, it's somewhat of a similar story to what happened with him at DC United. I don't think when you just look at the quality of the squad and the results that he got with that squad, he did a terrible job. I think it's a pretty average roster when you look at the Eastern Conference, and they finished middle of the pack. So I don't think he massively underachieved with the talent that he was given. I don't think he's a bad coach. The problem he's had consistently, or at least in these two jobs in MLS, is that he seems to fall out with players quite easily. And that is an issue, I think, at Montreal, who are a club where the recruitment and the personnel decisions are all the responsibility of the sporting director, Olivier Renard, and the head coach doesn't really drive those. And so when you start falling out with players like Victor Wanyama, who 8 of the last 11 games of the season is an unused substitute, Sean Raya, last game was July 2nd, and then he's not been in a match day squad since. But by doing that, like, you're inserting yourself into personnel decisions and recruitment decisions because something then has to be done about those players. And so that, I think, starts to get a little bit tricky in terms of how they want the club to work. So based on that, and also, like I said, the comments that we heard made in the aftermath of the season, I'm not hugely surprised that they've decided to make a change here.
And Jordan, just to add a bit of context here, because it's football, coaches get sacked, it's part of the game. But to go from just last December inking a 2-year deal to how quickly things seem to sour, do you agree with Ollie that it was warranted? And were you at all surprised by the decision this morning?
I do agree with Ollie that it was warranted. I'm not surprised because Hernan Sada fell into a trap that a lot of coaches or higher ups are falling into now, is when you lose the room. When you lose the dressing room, you leave yourself open and exposed for the chopping block. Look, I am not by any means a former player saying that players should run everything. No. But I think when you're a top guy, when you're a manager, when you're a head coach, you are literally the leader of the army. So you can't, from the lowest guy on the team for the academy player to the top guy or the most experienced, probably in Wanyama, you have to find a way to keep everyone equal and everyone rowing in the same direction and everyone pushing for the squad. Of course, throughout the season, it's just like a family. There are going to be times where there's discontentment and someone's not happy. But I think the man management skill of a coach is crucial in this environment in 2023 and moving forward. I think players have more input than they've ever had. I think also just seasons are longer and there are more games. So the balance of who you play, when you play them, when you bring them on is a huge thing as well. And it's not easy being a head coach, but I think these are the things you sign up for. And I think when people talk about coaching and leading a group, they think so much about tactics and how you want to get the best out of the group and how you want to play and your identity. And all these things are great. But for me, I think a fundamental value that sometimes gets forgotten is how you invest in every single person, because how you really judge if you're a great coach. Yes, of course, it's wins and losses, but it's how you win and how you get the best out of people, right? If there's a player that's 17th, 18th on the squad, but he's happy and motivated and pushing, that's challenging the number one player on the squad as well. I think Losada got away from that as well, which is natural when you're like my way or the highway. I feel like he had a bit of that mentality, specifically towards the end of the season, and Ollie pointed that out. But I think when you lose the dressing room, you leave yourself a bit exposed and vulnerable to be on the chopping block. And I think that's just what happened with Losada in the end.
We'll talk about maybe where's a potential landing spot for Hernan Losada in a moment, Ollie, but it's the theme. It is this story with CF Montreal. It's the purse strings. They're tighter than Petrillo on a one soccer night out. She's just not opening up that purse to pick up the tab. There's not
Say
a lot
it
of money
again,
flowing about
James.
CFL. She's not here. I'm
Clip
allowed to make that
clip
joke.
that.
Play it back, man.
But we already know that the Saputos aren't really necessarily, especially in this current economic environment, saying we're going to go out and spend a lot of money. They have to pay Losada to not be there. And maybe now that narrows the focus or maybe shortens the list of who might replace him. So with that, unless you disagree and think that maybe the coach is such an important decision that they might be willing to add another zero, perhaps, who do you think might be a front runner or two to land this gig?
Well, I don't think they'll ever go for a big name because I don't think they want a very powerful coach for the reasons I just said. The Olivier Renard is always going to be in charge while he's there. He's the sporting director. He does transfers. He decides what the squad looks like. The overall philosophy of the club is bringing in young players, trying to develop them, trying to move them on for a profit, and that's always going to be directed by the people above the coach. So I think they're always going to lean towards younger coaches who are more content just to coach the team and kind of stay in that lane. I think there's a bunch of potential candidates you could look at. Obviously, I'm going to have a Canadian slant because those are the coaches I'm most familiar with. I think you can look at Bobby Smirniotis has been linked to this job before. Whether he would go to a place where he's not the sporting director or doesn't have influence in that regard like he does at Forge, I don't know. But obviously, he's an outstanding young coach. Tommy Wooden Jr. has a relationship with Montreal. They've taken players on loan. They've played Montreal. There's some links there. He has also proven his ability to balance winning and being successful with developing young players and moving them onto a higher level. I don't think anyone in the CPL has a better track record of doing that than Tommy Wooden Jr. does. A former CPL coach who's in contention for, it seems, a couple of jobs right now. There's a few vacancies around MLS. Is Paduka. Speaks French among several other languages. Has a track record of every language under the sun. Has a track record of working with young players. Again, I think someone who would probably, because he's looking to take that step to being a head coach in MLS, would be content with kind of being the coach and not the manager, if that makes sense. And then maybe you can look at some names from the past as well. Marc Dos Santos, I think his reputation has been rehabilitated to a certain extent by his time with LAFC. He was getting a lot of credit for his work on set pieces there, which basically knocked Vancouver out of the playoffs. Mauro Biello, maybe the timelines don't add up because we know he's the interim coach of the national team and wants to be the candidate coach. And then maybe even looking internally at a former player who's now the assistant coach, Laurent Simon, could be one that they consider as well. They've obviously promoted internally before and had a lot of success with it with Wilfred Nancy. So tons of names. I'm sure there'll be more from abroad, from within MLS that maybe we're not so familiar with. But there's a few to throw out to maybe get the ball rolling.
And Jordan, anything to add there? I think what's interesting about your comment about the importance of the player in the modern game, you didn't necessarily have the opportunity to play directly under Paduka, but the vibe we got from players we spoke to, players who went up against him, is that he seems more like that player's coach. You can really sense the togetherness for his groups of players. Is that a name that interests you? And maybe any more you want to add here?
No, Paduka is the one that is most interesting to me. I think obviously the other candidates that Ali said are definitely a great option as well. But Paduka, walking in the bubble in Winnipeg, never met him before, speaks Danish to me. I'm like, what is going on? And I look behind me, and the people that know Paduka, it's a funny story because we all have a similar story to how he can just connect. But I think for CF Montreal, this is a guy that you would want, one that speaks French, but he's so hungry to prove himself, right? He's one of those guys that he'll do something in the CPL Pacific. He'll beat Forge in the finals in 2021, and he's hungry and invested. And he's like, okay, what's next? Then goes to Charlotte, does well, and he's like, okay, what's next? Right? Sorry, I'm missing a team in between there because it was MLS Next.
FC Dallas, he was with their MLS Next Pro side after Pacific.
Right? So that wasn't the step, but the next one. He's so hungry to improve his side, but also himself. And what I really appreciate about Paduka, which I saw in myself as a player, but I could see it with him as a player and as a manager, he has a chip on his shoulder. He's like, oh, you can't beat that guy? Okay, let me go against him. He had that same chip on his shoulder against Bobby Smirniotis in the finals, which, again, there are little details that helps you win that final match with Hijab Rapport scoring. But I think that belief in a manager is infused in a team. and they're like, hey, we can do this. At that time in 2021, no one thought they could really beat Forge in the final. But Paduka, the way that he had his team, the way he had them believing, you see the moment with Jamar Dixon at the end in 2021 lifting the North Star Shield. That is what he brings, right? And I think that would be a perfect person to bring that into Montreal's locker room, because there's been a bit of contention. There's been a bit of up and down. There's been players that, hey, I don't really want to play for the badge. There's been so much going on with the club. I think in situations like that, you almost need to go old school. Someone who is just all about the team, doesn't care about the front office, cares about winning and having a winning mentality. And if you want someone to bring that, I think Paduka is a name that you don't really have to look far. Like, he's right there, and I think he's ready to do the job.
To Jordan's point, he is a fierce competitor, and I think that rubs some people up the wrong way. Not everyone likes it, but I think it has worked for him in the past because he builds such a strong connection with his players. There's a trust there that, you know, even if he's digging you out, you know that he cares about you, right, as a player, and he's doing it for the right reasons. But yeah, he's definitely one that's interesting. If you want a coach who wants to win and is really, really driven, but also has that experience of working with young players and will throw young players in and trust them, he definitely ticks a lot of boxes.
Like,
Obviously,
for sure, I'm biased, Adam. Sorry,
Yeah.
quickly. Just for sure, I'm biased because being closer to the CPL coaches, the Smaniotis, the Tommy Wheeldon Juniors, you start to develop a relationship. But I think in terms of, I focus on Paduka, you can do Smaniotis, you can do Tommy Wheeldon Jr. as well. But it's just bringing that, I want to make this club better, and I'm so good at managing players, personnel. I think that's what's important. And I think with so much with the Saputo family or CF Montreal, you just need a presence like that to go and say, hey, I'm not really worried about anything else. I want to take care of business and take care of the guys in the locker room. And then hopefully that leads to success.
No, and it's an excellent point. I think sometimes when there have been coaching vacancies from the Canadian men's national team to wherever, maybe what's next after the CPL for coaches as well, not necessarily a knock, but a consideration from some supporters who may not be as familiar as we are covering the CPL as closely as we do. Say, well, what's that experience? Are they ready to make the jump to MLS? Well, Paduka has shown he's willing to put in the work to go to an MLS Next Pro side, to get it on with Charlotte, and has put in that work and understands the league. Obviously, he's played in the league. He has the greatest celebration of all time with the Whitecaps and his little segue after winning the Canadian Championship. These are all good things. I think at the very least, I'm with you, gentlemen, that he should get at least a phone call from Renard or Saputo.